Hey guys, Colin from lotusphotography.ca. Next segment of our getting you off the auto settings on the camera. We've already talked about ISO. We've also talked about our shutter speed, and now we're going to be talking about something called aperture. So aperture controls basically two main things on the camera when you're shooting in regards to how to impact your pictures. One, as almost everything, is light, and the other is what we call depth of field. So the light part is pretty self-explanatory. Whenever you have your exposure settings set as, we'll say, as low as possible, so there's lots of different settings depending on what lens you're using as to what you can have for your aperture. So you could have it set down to, say for example, the lens that I have on the camera right now, it can go to what we call 1.8. It's called f1.8. So that's a very low aperture. A lot of lenses can't go quite that low, but it goes 1.8, and then it can scale right up to, well, very, very high. I mean, 16, 24, it can go high up. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is that the lower it is, the example here that I'm using at the 1.8, as you can see, that's the lowest number. What that means is that low number is going to open up the width of the lens as large as possible. So if you're it can open up that, say that's at 1.8, so that's open really, really far. And then as you move the we'll just call them F numbers to keep it simple. As you move them up, say you move it up to F11 for example, then that's going to close the lens to an even smaller area. So you're going to get less light in. So basically the lower your number, say for example the 1.8, is going to let lots of light, and then as you raise that number, it's going to start to shrink, and it's going to be your image is going to be getting darker. So that's something you need to compensate for by something else, the ISO, getting that raised, or the shutter speed, slowing that shutter speed so that you let more light in. So that can be compensated that way, so it affects your lighting. The major thing that you're going to change, or the major reason why you're going to change your aperture, is that depth of field that I mentioned. So we have to go into a little bit more detail just to kind of describe what that is and why it's important. When you're taking a picture of something, you'll notice, say the point and shoot cameras before you got the digital SLR, point and shoot, when you take a picture, everything has great detail, right? Everything from the thing that you're actually taking the picture of to everything in the background, everything in the foreground, everything seems to be sharp and in focus. That's because the aperture is basically, it's at a very high setting, like f22 or something like that, really high. And that means everything's in focus. When you move it down to something low, like for example that 1.8 that we talked about, what that does is, that means instead of everything being in focus, you're selecting a small area to be in focus. So if I, for example, I've got the camera set at about 3.2 right now. So sitting here, hopefully, I'm in focus. You'll see a little bit of the background back there should be a little bit blurry. As I come towards the camera like this, you should start to see me get blurry and out of focus, and then as I come back in and back here again, I should be in focus. So that's what it does. It shortens that, what we call depth of field. So at those higher F numbers, your depth of field is very large, and then as we shorten it, move it down towards those smaller numbers, it shortens that depth of field, and that gets a greater impact on your picture. You get your target subject completely in focus, everything else all blurry, and it automatically draws your eye into the image. So that's what the depth of field is. So whenever you're shooting, you want to decide basically in regards to where your subject is, or if you have multiple subjects, how high or low are you going to have to set that aperture. If you have 3 people and they're standing, I'm sitting here, I have somebody back there, and someday halfway towards the camera and I want to have them all in focus, then I'm going to need one of those higher f numbers to keep them all in focus. But if it's just me and I want to take a portrait shot of just me, I don't need to worry about what's back there or what's in front of here. I can move that number really low to get me in focus and everything else all blurry. And that's probably what you see in a lot of those really cool looking portrait shots that you see that look really professional. It's those blurred out areas and then the person that they're photographing in great focus. So that's all about the aperture, controlling two things: the depth of field and the light. So that's the third setting that we wanted to talk about in regards to getting control of your camera. We're going to do one more video which will kind of put everything together and give you some pointers on how to start moving yourself into using those settings and the easiest way to learn to use the settings. So we'll go through all that, and then hopefully at the end of that video then you'll have the tools you need to start taking some shots. Maybe we'll get you guys maybe to send in a few shots or what you've done to try and change the settings. If you've had any questions or recommendations that you need or anything, feel free to comment below or on the Facebook page or anything like that. And hopefully get you guys moving on to the manual mode eventually on the camera. But we will eventually get you there. Next video we will take you through a few sort of baby steps on how to get to that part. But ultimately being able to use the manual mode to change all the settings yourself, so you can start creating stuff that's really is yours and not just system generated as to what everybody else is bringing in. Okay, so this is Colin from lotusphotography.ca.